The Nintendo Switch has a reputation for being home to some of the best games of the past decade. Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Super Mario Odyssey, Metroid Prime Remastered, just to name a few. But with so many great games, there's bound to be a few duds. We've all been there, right? You're really looking forward to a game, or you just blind buy one that looks like, your type of game, and as soon as you start playing it, you realize that you've made a horrible mistake. So I started wondering, what are some of the worst Switch games out there? Balan Wonderworld, definitely one of them, but there's got to be more, right? So I decided to track down the worst reviewed game on the Switch according to Metacritic. So, just a reminder, to get a Metacritic score, a game has to get at least 4 reviews from critics. So that eliminates a lot of shovelware on the eShop. What I found was the worst reviewed game on the Switch, at least according to Metacritic, is a little game called Vroom in the Sky. Before looking it up, I had never heard of it. I wanted to go in with an open mind, so I didn't read any of the reviews beforehand. I just saw there were some there, and they weren't that great, but I didn't read them. I just grabbed my Switch, fired up the eShop, and $9.99 later, I was diving into Vroom in the Sky. As the title suggests, Vroom in the Sky is a magical flying bike game. It was published by a company called Poisoft. Never heard of them before personally, maybe you have, but it was published back in April 2017, the first year of the Switch. That was right around the same time as Shovel Knight, Treasure Trove, Breath of the Wild, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, the list goes on. The game has a simple premise. Fly through rings as fast as you can and collect stardust. You can then use that stardust to buy things like new bikes, which have different stats. Okay, so it's a simple game. Simple doesn't mean bad, though. And the concept of the game isn't terrible. You've got these gigantic open zones, and you can fly anywhere you want to go on this magic motorcycle. Okay, wait, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the concept actually is terrible. So after I was playing for a while, I looked back at the reviews to see what were some of the big things, the big criticisms that the reviewers picked out. And one of the main ones was poor Japanese to English translation. And they were absolutely right. As you're playing through, you'll occasionally see character portraits appear in the bottom left of your screen, signaling, one character's talking to another, and the conversations are, well, they're a little hard to follow. You're like, what does this mean? What's that mean? The graphics are some of the ugliest you'll see on the Switch, and that's really saying something. The character models really aren't that bad, but the environments are these big, empty areas with just a handful of assets repeated over and over and over. The graphics themselves actually remind me of an original PlayStation game. There are 8 total levels, and you unlock them as you go, but every single one feels just like the one before it. Sure, there's small differences, like one has a big boat, and another one has a windmill farm, but in terms of just playing it, it doesn't really make a difference. To make things worse, it takes forever to get around these stages. The levels are way too big, and your motorcycle, even the upgraded ones available in the shop, is so slow. So for me, if one of the most interesting things about this game was the location, and they're not great, could the gameplay redeem it? No, it's repetitive, and worse, it's just boring. You just don't want to play. Like I mentioned earlier, in each level, there are a handful of rings you have to fly through, just like that other game. And when you've flown through them, you just fly to the exit. There are a few loose stardust thingies to find around the levels, but honestly, they're worth so little, it's not even worth tracking them down. After a certain amount of time, I can't remember how long, but it seems to happen pretty quick, a rival witch enters the stage and starts collecting some of the stardust too. You can shoot her down, kind of. The controls are a little wonky, it's hard to aim, so you're just shooting in her general direction and hoping that something connects. I thought the rival witch would be the really perfect opportunity for this game to add something interesting, but the levels are so huge, sometimes I would see her enter, based on the character portrait in the bottom left, but then I never actually saw her flying around. The player character and the other witch have some awkward back and forth, and honestly, that might be my favorite part of the game. So I've beat up on Vroom in the Sky a lot, but I think that the worst part is the lack of communication or direction. When you start the game, there's literally no explanation of what to do or why you're doing it. You're just flying through these rings for no reason. So the game just leaves you to figure it out on your own. Sure, there's a driving school, but it only teaches you basic maneuvers. And I think that the thing is, the reason they don't tell you what's going on is because there's not really anything actually happening. This is just a game about flying through rings. Other than the grind of collecting 1 million Stardust things to buy new motorcycles, there's really no challenge here. And even when you save up and buy these new motorcycles, they handle exactly the same as the motorcycle you had before. Like, there's not a perceivable difference between these vehicles. So the gameplay's not good, the graphics are bad, and there's just no real challenge. Ultimately, there's just not enough here to keep you interested. When I went into this game, I saw the Metacritic score, it's a 17, and I thought, there's no way it's actually that bad, right? Like, what game gets a 17? What game really gets below like a 50 these days, right? Well, I totally understand the critics here. This game is not worth your time or money. There are so many better games available on the Switch, especially if you're looking at the $10 and below. There's a lot of gems on the eShop, digital-only indie stuff that is so much better than this one. But if you're like me and you genuinely enjoy playing through bad games to see what the hype's about, Vroom in the Sky is $9.99 on the eShop. I'll put a link in the description. As always, thanks for watching and thanks for subscribing.
Oh, yeah.